Welcome to Public Comment. I'm John Dunbar, former mayor of Yountville.
And I'm Alfredo Pedroza, former Napa County supervisor.
Thank you for joining us as we talk about politics, people, and whatever else is on our mind. They have undervalued and undersupported public education.
We need to do better, and we're seeing issues that are rising to the top right now.
Because everybody else wants that money.
I think we're falling short.
The model is broken. Okay, Alfredo, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, John, I think what's on today's agenda is public education. And I know that can go in so many different ways, from private schools to charter schools to declining enrollment to school closures, which you have some experience with being the mayor of the town of Yountville. I think there's a lot there.
Yeah, and being a non-parent, you have a different perspective than I do. I do have that kind of unique perspective, having been an elected in a small town that had a 100-plus-year-old school that was closed because of the small class size and school size. There have been others that have been closed in Napa Unified School District, but it's not unique to Napa County. It's throughout California. And so we need to kind of expose some of the pressures and challenges that we are experiencing locally.
Look, I agree. And for the record, I've offered you and Jerry, you can take our kid, one or two or all three, anytime you want, just to give you that experience. But look, it's a hard discussion, right? And I don't think that you need to be an educator or a teacher or a PhD to have a conversation around public schools. I think we bring a different perspective to it, and that's healthy. The challenge I'm seeing, right, is we have one kid in public school, one kid at a Catholic private, and one kid in a Montessori school. They're all great. And for me, Brenda and I are a product of the public school system. So we have a fond, spot for public school because they created us. They helped us become who we are today. And we remember that. And, for us, like, we went to kindergarten. Well, I don't know about Brenda, but I went to kindergarten not speaking English, right? And to be having a podcast talking about public education, and if I'm too critical of it, it's not that I don't value what they did, because they did do a good job. I think looking at it at a point in time today, I think we can do better because people have choices now. And when you look at some of the data, right, I think 22% of the kids go to private school and over 78% go to public schools. Public schools still are educating the majority of our youth, right? But people with choices, families with choices, they're choosing private school. At least I'm seeing it in my circle of friends. And that causes me some consternation of why is that happening, right? And there's a lot of things we can talk about, but I just think we have to do better, right? This is the Napa Valley. Like, there's philanthropy here. There's innovation here. There's passion here. There's empathy here, right? We need to do better. And we're seeing issues that are rising to the top right now.
Yeah, let me give a little bit of context for Napa County in particular. 5 school districts in Napa County, by far the largest Napa Unified School District. But there's also Calistoga Unified, St. Helena Unified, Powell Mountain School District, and Pope Valley School District. Over 27, I think it's about 27 public schools compared to 15 private schools and 2 charter schools. So there is diversity of opportunity. What is a concern is there diversity within the populations of these schools? In some cases, yes. In some cases, there is a little bit more of a monoculture in those schools. Some of it driven by where the school campuses are located. If they're in neighborhoods that are predominantly a particular ethnicity, then you're going to have a greater percentage of that school population. But it shouldn't impact the quality of education that's available to the kids.
Look, I hadn't thought about this, but at the private schools, we're one in a Montessori and one in a Catholic. There's not a lot of kids that look like my kids, right? And in the public schools, you do see more diversity. And I bring that up because we just talked about DEI in a previous podcast, and that does weigh on me and Brenda, actually, right? We want our kids to be exposed to the world, the differences, the uniqueness, the challenges of it, right? We do not want to shield them. And as I say that, I'm reflecting back, we grew up at Lincoln Apartments, and our neighborhood school was McPherson, predominantly Latino. And when my parents moved to North Napa, I went to El Centro, a predominantly not Latino school. And it was something my parents were proud of. And now that I'm like thinking back about it, it wasn't that he didn't want me to go to school with kids that looked like me. He just associated a school that didn't look like us to be better. And I think that's the reality of what we're facing. And as you were speaking, I'm concerned now that with choice, you're going to see public schools maybe have more minority, composition than our private schools. And that's not a good outcome, in my opinion, right? Like you want diversity, but you can't fault parents for having choices at the same time.
Yeah, the affordability of education is challenging. I mean, I see that, again, being a non-parent, all our friends that have children, including you and Brenda, have real challenges and choices you have to make that are partially financially motivated. And it's unfortunate that we can't just have a diversity of opportunities and not have the cost of that education be so significant. But that's just the reality. It's just like how it impacts our housing opportunities and people's economic status is really a key factor in what choices you're able to make.
Well, look, I think the finances is a factor, right? And when we went to Sunrise, a Montessori school, and I told my mom what we had to pay. She said, "Why are you paying? They're 3 years old." But we placed value on that. And I couldn't expect my mom to understand because it was just different, right? And for us, it was a decision and a value that Brenda and I placed. If we want our kids to get exposed to education early on, right? So you have these trade-offs, right? But I think with public schools, again, they have 78% of the population of our youth. We have to make sure that they can compete. So when I see them spend money on fighting charter schools, I think that's dumb. Right now, you said this, I think, in one of the nice papers you create for We're Prepared, teachers are underpaid. And I think we should be paying teachers. You can't expect someone that's young and hungry and ambitious in the good way of creating education to go in there and say, I'm going to be happy with $53,000. It's your number. You tell me if it's right or wrong. It's broken, right? And I think that's part of what we have to daylight is public education is the bedrock to communities and societies. But when you're paying our educators $53,000, that doesn't work.
And I agree. One of the biggest challenges is the inconsistency of state funding and the heavy reliance that local public education has on state money. And that is the absolute reality. For decades, California has, depending on who you are, feel like they have undervalued and undersupported public education. And certainly in the last few years, when there's been a deficit at the state level, there have been significant reductions in funding for public education, which then means schools get closed, class sizes go up. Then you have challenges with teachers' unions that are representing their members and the pressures to increase those salaries. But the money's got to come somewhere. And when you do have declining enrollment based partially on fewer school-age children, but also the costs of education, even in a public setting, those continue to go up. And it makes the choice of public education harder if you do have the financial means to make a choice. There are a lot of families that don't have that option, and hopefully they're still getting a quality education.
Look, I hear your point about costs, but the cost should be driven based off paying teachers more. Where the rest of the cost goes, I don't know, but it shouldn't be towards adding more administration and more supervisors and more managers. It should be towards the people that are educating our kids. I really believe that, right? And I also think, again, the system is also very rigid. And it's like, well, we can only do this because we have these standards or we have unions. Okay, that sounds like an excuse to me because I have seen a system that works. Where my son goes to school, they have incredible teachers, compassionate, engaged, they challenge the youth. And I bet you they're not doing it for the money, right? But they somehow created a culture that is empowering and it's translating into the kids wanting to be there. And this is a public school. I don't know if all the schools are like that, but they've engaged the parents. They have an active parent club, right? So to me, there's examples of where it could work. But when you see the creation of private schools and charter schools, And I'm not seeing the reaction from our public school system. And it feels like it's a little bit archaic versus being more nimble and being willing to adjust.
I do think that the financial challenges that are present today tend to be relied on for basically excuses for all the difficult decisions that are getting made, whether it's closures or staff reductions. Recently saw again that Napa Unified is going to be laying off teachers and other district staff.
Well, lay off administrators, don't lay off teachers.
Well,
that's my opinion.
The money has to be there in order to operate. And I'm not trying to defend Napa Unified or any other district, because I have my issues with Napa Unified, the way they did close Yountville Elementary School that was around for over 100 years. And it was never meant to be a large school. But I understand the financial obligations a district has to fund a school. And when you have under 300 children, they call that a school that's too small to make it financially viable, even though that's exactly the kind of education and environment a lot of parents wanted their children in. And so it was painful to see that school closed. There were other schools in Napa County that were closed, most of them small schools. Harvest Middle School in Napa remains closed and has been for years, while the city, just like what Yountville went through with the district, negotiates a deal for that campus. And I personally found the district unreasonable about, their claim that, we want what's best for the community. But then they're going to say, we want maximum market value, as if we're going to build densely populated large mansion homes on this site. And that's what they want the value for. That doesn't sound like they really care about the interests of the community or the children that no longer get to go to those schools that are closed. I might be a little biased.
I agree. And I may disagree too, though, right? Because I don't have an issue with them selling land or assets to maximize the greatest return if they're investing it back in the kids. And that's where I see the disconnect, quite honestly, John, is I see innovation. Right. I've seen it when, they have some elementary schools that are considering going K-8, right? So they're trying to be a middle school. We've seen, kind of new tech. You've seen Napa Learns. You've seen this mixture of private and public partnerships. But I don't think that's catching up or keeping up with the pace of where the demand is from families in terms of what they're wanting. I think you were spot on of describing Yountville as a school where people would want their kids to go to. Right. But the fact that they closed it down because it fell into a definition is dumb. Like, so you're going to close this, so now it's a race to the bottom? Like, that's not what we want. And to me, that's the problem. It's like they have to adjust. Now, we also know that they have some issues that are beyond their control. Declining birth rate, declining population, right? Aging population. All those indicators aren't flashes of greatness for a future enrollment in a future feeder system, right? So that's beyond their control. So we got to look at both sides of the equation. The issue is once they're in the system, I think we're falling short. It's not everywhere, as I said, but we are falling short. And there are factors that I think are attributing to that they're using as an excuse versus a willingness to lean in and dig deep and say, how do we pivot? Because we do have families that are generous, that step up every time. It's gala season right now, so we're going to our kids' gala, and we're not just going to go and sit. Like, there's an expectation you raise your freaking paddle. So, that's happening here, right? Like, people are willing to donate. Right? I have a friend that's helping build the sports field. It's like, that's Napa, yet we're not harnessing that.
Well, you made me think of the creativity that we put in effect before Yountville was closed. When we were told that Yountville and Mount George, and I think there was another small
Stonebridge
school. They were on the chopping block. And I and some other folks from town went to the school district and the board of trustees and said, what do you need from us financially to keep the school open? And we were told there was a gap of about $50,000 back then between the ability to pay for the operations and stay within their budget. We was like, okay, so you're telling us if we raise that money and give it to you, then you won't close the school. And they said, that's correct. We raised that money for over a year
So
and kept the school open. And then it wasn't enough and they closed it. So, I get the pressures of being able to operate a school, and per student and per teacher, the numbers don't pencil out when you're a small school. I understand that. There are transportation costs associated with going all the way up to Yountville when you're based in the middle of the city of Napa. But there is the perspective, to your point about where's the creativity and changing of philosophy. That's what I would like to see more, because that's, I think, why there is such an interest in the private schools and even the charter schools. They're showing the creativity. Now, I get there are some very rigid structures in public school systems that are dictated a lot by the state and also by the county Office of Education. But the county Office of Education is really just a fiscal watchdog that doesn't have a whole lot of authority about how districts run their schools. So a more contemporary perspective on how to provide programs, how to educate the children, I think is appropriate. And then the money will flow if you're showing progress.
Well, look, I agree with you on that, right? And I also want to be mindful that our criticism isn't just on the system, right? Because education doesn't, start at 8 and end at 3, right? We have, as parents, you have to be engaged. You have to be there with the kids, and to me, that's important, right? And I grew up, like I think I was telling you earlier, when my parents would come home and ask, what homework we were doing, and they didn't speak English, right? But it was this concept of we're holding you accountable. And that's education at home. So regardless whether it's your private, public, charter, there's an element at home that can't be outsourced to your teachers. Now, having said that, I think you're spot on saying parents want their kids to be challenged for the future of tomorrow. And an example, I built a mission in 4th grade. My son is building a mission now. And I'm just questioning, like, what's the skill set they're learning building this mission, where you can go buy a kit on Amazon and with a couple of glue sticks, you glue it together. It's like, so what are we teaching them, right? In that moment when, I'm telling you, my son has said, "Hey, Dad, I don't want to participate in this school activity, Alps." And I was like, "Hey, if you're going to get off that because you're not being challenged, we're going to replace it with something else." And we're doing coding, like, because he thinks coding can help him create video games. And I'm doing that because I want him to be challenged and prepared for tomorrow. I'm looking at a mission. And again, I may be coming from a place of not knowing the full thing. Like, there might be a book report they have to do on that. And if it is, they're working on writing and reading, great. But from what I'm seeing, I'm like, that sure seems like an archaic way of educating our future. And I'm struggling with that, right? Like, I want him to do coding. I want him to do math, and he loves math. So, like, I'm a parent with a choice. So when we're presented with that, we're going to look at, okay, what's the best thing we do for our kids? And I don't buy all the restrictions that public schools have. They have to challenge and buck the system too. If you're going to challenge the state for the betterment of our kids, I think you're going to have a community standing next to you saying, "Game on," right? So we're not seeing that, and we've seen other examples where the school is rigid. Surplusing land, right? They're pretty rigid, and they'll tell you they have one charge to do. Or, around their use of athletic fields, I'm kind of jaded on that because they haven't been the best partner for youth sports. So they can do more, and they should do more, right?
Yeah, I have grown to appreciate some of the pressures that are on districts throughout the state. You're just watching how many closures are happening, how many districts are consolidating schools, and it makes it harder for families, unfortunately. But capital projects are also massively expensive. And there is no way a school district can keep money in their bank account to raise $200, $300 million because everybody else wants that money. And I get it. We talk about raising teacher salaries. So there's a legitimate earning potential that you're going to bring in even more qualified and dedicated teachers. But where does that money come from? And is it, instead of paying administrators six figures for what they're doing, but they're running a large corporation basically. So I get the pressures in the different directions, but fundamentally, it's cliche to say it's all about the children. It is supposed to be about the children, but there's a practical component to it all.
I think teachers should get paid more. And I think there has to be some analysis of where the school districts are spending the money. And I think you printed out, like, this community has had the back of, our school districts passing these bonds, right? And there's very few that we've said no to. And this is bonds where we're willing citizens to tax ourselves for the betterment of schools. And the outcome they haven't changed in all ways, right? So I think there has to be accountability, right? And we use that word a lot, but like, enough. Like, you have a community here that's engaged. You have a community here that has showed a willingness to do private-public partnerships. So like, where I hope this goes is I hope that those kids that are out there thinking about what they want to be when they grow up, that teachers and being an educator is a worthy career, and that we're prioritizing that through the budget and we're paying more. And if you're an administrator, guess what? You better be earning your salary, because you and I know what it's like to work 40 hours a week. And I can tell you there's very few times I worked 40 hours a week as a supervisor, right? Because you wanted to put in your time. You wanted to work hard. And I think this is a bigger issue of we're getting a little content of, I'm only going to work 40 hours. No, like, you have to do more. And I'm not categorizing all administrators that they're only working 40 hours a week. So if we're going to get emails about that, fine. But what I'm saying is you have to be passionate about this stuff, and you're educating the future. Like, this is where it is. You have a community that has choices. So partner with those that are willing to do more, and stop giving us the excuses that this is the only way it's been done, because they are educating 78% of our future. That's a fact.
You want to talk about passion. Passion comes from teachers that are paying out of their own pocket to provide experiences and resources for their children in their classrooms. That's a shame. It should never happen. And think about other jobs where that is happening. It's pretty rare. I'm not even sure I could think of another where you're expected to pay to do the job that you want to do at a high level when you're fully committed to doing it. And that means the model is broken somewhere. It's easy to always blame the state. It's also easy to blame the local administration about the way they manage their money. There's probably some blame to go around in all those areas. But let me just highlight since I did some of the research about the big ticket items. People also wonder, why are the campuses, 60, 70 years from the last time they were renovated, or we like modernization of this or that. Yeah. And also, security is a whole different deal today than it used to be, where you need fencing around campuses and you need security so that those campuses are safer than they ever used to be. Looking at you mentioned bond financing, and the Napa Unified has had 4 bond measures since 2016. Measure H was for $269 million, and that passed.
You're making me drink, but go ahead.
I know. 2022, Measure A1, which was Napa City and its surrounding areas specifically. Measure A1 for $200 million, that narrowly failed. Also in 2022, Measure A2 was $25 million in American Canyon specifically. Yeah. That passed. And then just last year, 2024, Measure B passed for $230 million. That sounds like a lot of money, right?
It is.
But then when you look at the capital projects facility master plan for Napa Unified, it's over $500 million. Yeah. And so it's like, how did it grow to that number? Well, for decades, maintenance was deferred. For decades, investment was not being made. And so it accumulated. Just like if you don't repair that, storm damage at your home, it's going to get worse. It's not going to go just disappear and be all good. So there are some significant capital pressures on districts. And I understand how hard it is to balance teacher salaries, administrator salaries, state funding support or lack thereof, and then all the other expenses there are to run schools.
Look, I hear about that capital budget. We've all dealt with them, but that means someone was not accountable. If you're letting that capital wish list balloon to that, yeah, they've been getting revenue. I think someone needs to be accountable to how they're spending money. Maybe there's a good reason. I'm just not seeing it, right? And I'm tired of bureaucracy being used, right, to justify these poor outcomes. Just like when we got accused of our roads are in bad condition. What the hell are you going to do about it? You're going to invest in that to repair it. I'm not going to fault the past. Wasn't there, but we're going to change the sense. I'm here. My accountability is this. And that's how you measure it, right? So enough of, I get what you're saying, right? Like it's happened. But to me, and where I want to end with, like, look, I can still name you my teachers, starting from kindergarten, Mrs. Brown, to Mr. Johnston, to Mrs. Caffo, right, to Mr. Reich, to Mrs. Reeves, where, I proposed to Brennan in our high school. Like, I remember them for a reason because it made a difference in my life, right? So you have people that are care and are passionate. So that's the magic, right? So let's focus on that. Let's invest in that. But don't point the finger at public schools, at private schools and charter schools when they're trying to offer their kids options. So enough of the noise. You're educating 70% of our future. Own it, do it, and do better.
One thing I want to,
and we're wrapping up with you.
Yeah, so I want to help us end on a positive note.
Hey, remembering my teachers is positive.
How about remembering all the friends that you made in those early years that you might still have?
They were in my wedding, actually.
And that's the beauty of being in that shared learning space is you're not just learning math, science, reading, writing. You're learning about interacting with people that might be in your life the rest of your life. And so it's important to remember the value and the benefits, deal with the frustrations and the challenges, absolutely. But this is such an important part of every generation. It's worth working hard for.
Agree. Cheers.
Cheers. So I know we normally wrap up out on the porch, but a hailstorm is keeping us from doing that. So how do you feel about our conversation about public education?
I think we're going to get some emails around it. But look, I think we brought our own perspective to it, John. I think we approached it in a very kind of genuine way of why we're having this conversation. So to me, it felt good. But I am concerned, man. I hope that the kids out there are getting educated well and someone sees the spark and they want to go be an educator. Like, I hope that happens, right? Because we need a system where you have people that want to be teachers because they have the significant responsibility of educating our future, man. So I still have hope that there's going to be some reform. And in that reform, we pay our teachers more and you have more people that want to be teachers. And if that happens, I think we're going to be okay.
Yeah, I think Napa County as a community as a whole really does embrace the shared responsibility. Yeah. Those of us that are non-parents, we still, through our property taxes and other support and philanthropy, we support all of you that have children in school. And it's a good thing for all of us because we all benefit when we are educating our next generation of leaders. We want them to be the best and the brightest. So it's on us to help support that.
I'm glad you feel that way because my kids have a gala that's coming up.
I am pretty sure I'm getting my hair cut that night.
No, you're not. But well said, right? It's a shared responsibility. It's a community responsibility. So on that note, to education.
Cheers.